The morning did not arrive so much as it thinned into being, like gauze pulled over a wound, the sky the color of old linen, the sun not yet certain it would break through. Across the hard pan east of the perimeter, a wind moved over ground that remembered boots, tires, and the soft falls of exhausted men. The wind lifted grit into air that already tasted of metal. In that air, the hum of generators stitched steadiness into the silence between distant cracks. A base called Al-Mirage lay low against the desert, its prefabs and blast walls and coiled wire squinting toward a horizon that never answered. He walked before the others stirred. Ethan Hale, in fatigues that didn't quite fit, sleeves rolled once, pen clipped to the placket where a ribbon might have lived on someone else. He walked with a book in his pocket, not because he needed words, but because he feared the hour when words might leave him. He had been a literature student long enough to imagine that language could outlast conflict. He had been an interpreter long enough to know conflict learned languages faster than any man. He cut past the laundry lines and satellite dishes toward the berm. The guard on duty nodded without lifting the rifle from its lazy angle. A radio murmur bled from the tower, weather from a place that still had rain. The wind pushed against Ethan's cheeks, slipped dust into his mouth, reminded him he was not home, not anywhere that claimed him. He stopped at the edge where the ground rolled down into the nothing-colored plain. In the distance, a convoy pawed at the horizon with its dust, trucks like beads on a string pulled too tight. Somewhere behind him, a door slammed, the clatter of stainless steel, a woman's voice laughing once and ending it quickly, as if laughter were a resource to be rationed. He turned to the sound and saw her crossing the corridor between medical and the mess. Layla Nassar, hair caught under a scarf the color of damp clay, sleeves pushed to the elbows, white coat open to the heat. She carried a bag of saline over one shoulder, like a flag lowered to half-mast. She wore her tiredness without letting it own her face. He didn't wave. He never did. Watching her move through the morning, he held himself still until his stillness felt like an object he could set down. She saw him all the same. Her eyes caught the light the way glass does when a corner of sun finds it, calm and exact. She lifted her chin by the smallest degree, recognition, not invitation, not distance, something in between, a narrow bridge that could never support weight. Then she was gone into the open door, and the hinge complained softly, and then the room took her. "Morning, Hale," a voice said behind him, friendly and not. Ethan turned. The voice had a body like a doorframe. Captain Ryan Hale, the title sharp as the creases in his sleeves, brother by blood but not, no longer by country. Ryan moved like the base had been built for him, like ground became level where he stepped. He had slept less than 6 hours, shaven anyway, eyes with the unblinking focus of a man who had converted fatigue into purpose and hope into orders. "You're up early," Ryan said. "I was up," Ethan said, and shrugged. He had learned to let his words carry no texture when they spoke. Texture invited memory. Memory shortened tempers. Ryan followed his look out to the convoy. "They're bringing in 6 from the night raid. One of them talkative, one of them already dead. The others, they'll be what they'll be." He rolled his shoulders once, as if loosening a knot he'd had for years. "Eat something, will you? People forget to feed translators around here." "Translators eat doubt," Ethan said, before he could stop himself. Ryan smiled, almost. "Then you'll never starve." He clapped Ethan's arm, more to mark their relation than to feel it, and moved toward HQ, boots scuffing the dust into small arguments that settled behind him. Ethan watched him go with the old ache, admiration like a scar that healed badly, love that had too many names and none he could say. The day collected itself and stood up fully. Heat made a syllable out of every surface. In the mess, trays hummed against the metal line, someone's laughter again, and then not. A spoon struck a bowl with the decisive note of impatience. Ethan ate quickly. Eggs, flat bread that might once have been soft, coffee the color of a bad memory. He carried the book to the table and didn't open it. Words were heavier when carried, lighter when read. He didn't want lightness in him. Not before work. The convoy arrived like a threat made into routine. The 6 were led past the supply shed, wrists secured in plastic, feet moving in that half-shuffle of men who can't afford to fall. One was bleeding from the scalp in a way that looked dramatic and wasn't dangerous. One stared at the sky as if it were a question a teacher had asked him 30 years ago. One met Ethan's eyes as if translation were a door through which a person might step and find forgiveness on the other side. Ethan held no doors. The room where they did interviews had originally been meant for briefings. A map still hung at the far end, the river a blue bright enough to be cruel. The air conditioner labored like an old man telling a story no one asked to hear. A tape machine sat on a table with its mouth open, waiting. The plastic chairs remembered the shape of more desperate men than the day had hours. Colonel Maddox arrived last. He wore his rank like it was a solution to the problem of being mortal. His face had the sand-blasted look of men who decided long ago never to soften. He nodded at Ethan without warmth. "We'll be efficient this morning," he said to the room, though the room didn't need the reminder. "We have one who claims he can read our maps better than we can. We'll test him." "Sir," Ethan said. Maddox's gaze rested on him. "No poetry today, Hale." "No, sir." "Good." He turned to the door. "Bring me the map reader." They brought in a man whose age could have been anywhere between 30 and 50. Dust makes everyone equal that way. He sat where they told him to sit. A guard poured water into a paper cup and held it like an offering. The man took it like a ritual. He looked at the blue river on the wall as if he'd never seen water before. When his eyes came back, they found Ethan and stayed there. "What's your name?" Maddox asked, and gestured. "Ismuk?" Ethan said in Arabic, then corrected himself. "Ismuk, your name." The man smiled without humor. "Names are for men who return home." "Your name," Maddox repeated in English and tapped his pen on the table as if punctuation could injure. "Tell him none of us return," the man said in Arabic. Ethan considered the line like he would a sentence he might underline in a book. He didn't move. "He says his name is Majid," Ethan said. "Majid," Maddox repeated. He wrote it as if writing claimed it. "Majid, tell me why there were coordinates written on the inside cover of your little prayer book. Tell me why they matched our routes." Majid's eyes slid to the prayer book sealed now in a clear bag. He took a breath that tried to be deep. "Because prayers without coordinates are words that don't reach anything," he said, and watched Ethan watch him. Ethan let the words pass over his teeth before he offered them up. "He says he found the book, sir. He doesn't know what the numbers mean." Maddox's mouth made a line sharp enough to cut the air in front of it. "Ask him who gave him the numbers," Ethan asked. Majid's eyes fell to the table between them. "A ghost," he said. "A man who speaks in the wrong language." Ethan did not translate that, not at first. The tape machine's reels rotated with the indifference of planets. Outside, a helicopter shouldered the sky wide, and the sound stepped through the thin walls like a brute. Ethan's tongue felt like an animal he'd been asked to train and hadn't. "He says a man he didn't know," he said finally. "Someone who spoke English." "Someone of ours, then," Maddox said. His voice didn't change. His eyes moved to the window as if an answer could be found there. "Ask him for the signal path. How does it leave? Who carries it?" Ethan asked. Majid licked his lower lip like a child who'd been told to repeat a lesson. "Through the clinic," he said. "There are radios. There is paper. The paper finds its way under bandage rolls. The rolls find their way to a market. The market finds a cousin, and so on, all the way to men who don't bleed when they should." Ethan's mouth opened and closed without making sound. He saw in his mind the clinic's white tiles like teeth. The bandage rolls Layla kept aligned with a precision that held the world together one small line at a time. He saw her handwriting, the difficult English loops that were careful the way a person is careful with a stranger's child. "He says," Ethan began and stopped. Maddox's pen waited over the pad. The tape waited. Majid's eyes waited. Ethan tasted dust and something like copper. "He says the clinic is used," he said quietly, "for moving messages." Maddox nodded once, just enough to register that reality had kept its appointment with him. "Ask him for a name." "Names are for men who return home," the man had said, and the wind outside hit the building with a sound like a palm striking a sternum. Ethan asked for a name. Majid's gaze went back to the river on the wall, to a blue line that promised a path, however mythical, from one place to another. "A nurse," he said finally. "Local." Quick hands, quicker eyes. Ethan did not ask the next question. He felt it climb his throat like a hot thing. Say her name, say it, and the saying will make it true. He saw Layla's fingers turning a bandage in on itself, making a braid that held closed a boy's future. He saw her across the mess with that half nod that hung between people who wanted to trust and couldn't in good faith. Maddox's pen scratched gently. "He doesn't know the name," Ethan said, surprised to hear calm in his own voice. "He says she is new. He says she came from the city 2 months ago." He kept his eyes on the paper in front of him as he lied by subtraction, taking away the specificity that would make harm precise. Maddox leaned back. The chair creaked with the pleasure of a man who knew it could hold his weight. "We can work with that," he said. He gestured subtly, and the guard stepped forward, not to strike, just to be the possibility of striking. "Ask him where the messages originate. Ask him how the whole chain begins." Majid's smile touched his mouth again and went no further. "With you," he said, "with your maps, your routes, your arrogance, with the idea that a country can be measured and owned. The chain begins with language." Ethan's breath performed a small betrayal. It quickened. In the tape's circular patience, in the colonel's controlled impatience, in the detainee's weary certainty, he recognized a structure, a sentence diagram he might have drawn in another life. Subject, verb, object. He recognized which of them was the verb. "He says he doesn't know," Ethan said. "He says there are many hands. He says no one owns the chain." A choice again, a choice that made him feel as if his bones had rotated half a degree inside his skin. He swallowed and felt the swallow all the way down. When they ended, it wasn't because truth had been exhausted, only because time had. The guard led Majid away. The tape machine's reels fell still with a sound like a sigh given to no one. Maddox stood, put both hands flat on the table, leaned forward as if to scent the residue of answers left in the air. "Transcripts by end of day," he said. "We have to cut arteries at the clinic before they clot." He gave Ethan a look that might have been approval, if approval were a species of threat. "You did fine." "Sir," Ethan said. After Maddox left, Ethan sat with the map and the empty chair. He let the quiet settle until it almost became a surface he could walk on. Then he went to the clinic because to not go would have told him what he feared was already true. The clinic was a contained miracle of discipline, gauze stacked in equal towers, scalpel handles wrapped like the grips of fencing foils, bottles labeled in both languages as if the labels themselves might prevent misunderstanding. The air smelled of ethanol and human patience. He stood in the doorway until Layla noticed him, which took no time at all. "Are you hurt?" she asked, and then smiled to soften the question into something social. "Or only empty?" "Empty is a kind of hurt," he said, and regretted it because it sounded like he wanted attention for a wound he had manufactured. He lifted a hand and let it fall. "I wanted to ask you about supplies." She tilted her head the way she did when she was listening to more than the words. "We always want supplies," she said. "Bandages, antibiotics, the kind they don't lock in a cabinet 3 locks deeper than the others. Suture kits that don't contain disappointment. Which kind did you want?" "The kind you send to the market," he said, and watched the sentence land. He saw the briefest change in her breathing, the smallest shift at the corner of her eye, as if a bird had flown too close to a window and the room had to adjust to not breaking. "We send waste to the market," she said evenly. "Clean waste, but waste. The cardboard, the cores, things to wrap soap. "I'm writing a report," he lied, because the truth would have sounded like a confession. "They want to know the chain, the vendors, how it works." "And you?" Her gaze lifted fully into his then, something steady and unsentimental. "What do you want to know, Ethan?" His name in her voice felt like an object placed in his hands with care. He looked past her to the sink, to the 2 cups there, one with its lip chipped, one with a crack that had not yet betrayed its function. "I want to know the names of things," he said softly, "so I don't make up new ones." "You think I am a name," she said, and there was no accusation in it, only a kind of sorrow that made him understand that sorrow's vocabulary was limited. It had the same words in every language. "People will come," she went on. "They will ask for lists. The lists will hurt people who are not on the lists as much as people who are. You know this." He nodded. He had nothing to put next to her statement to balance it. Ryan arrived as if summoned by the pressure of their silence. He strode in with that posture restraint drills into men whose bodies want to move faster than their minds. "2 of the detainees already recanted," he said, looking directly at Ethan and then shifting his gaze to Layla, as if to spare his brother the burden of being the direct recipient of military facts. "1 will break by evening. We'll need to shut down the clinic's outgoing materials until we clear the chain." Layla said nothing for a moment that stretched long enough to become a kind of language itself. "If you shut down the clinic," she said, "you will kill people. The chain that matters will be broken." "We'll keep it open for medicine," Ryan said. "We'll lock down the rest. It's temporary." He looked then at Ethan again. "You were in with Maddox. Does he believe the clinic is compromised?" Ethan's mouth moved, and a familiar small panic rose in him, the panic of a performer whose lines were written by a playwright he did not trust. He thought of Majid's eyes finding the painted river. He thought of the tape. He thought of Maddox's pen waiting like a blade held point down, ready to fall with the smallest release of fingers. "He believes what he needs to believe," Ethan said. Ryan accepted this as if it were a yes. He nodded once, a gesture that meant, "Later, we will test this with action." He turned to Layla with something softer under the mask of rank. "We'll make it quick. I'll personally see to it that you get what you need. I won't let them bleed because of a chain." She searched his face and then allowed herself a small trust, the kind a person puts on loan expecting to be disappointed and willing to try anyway. "Thank you," she said. When Ryan left, the room lost something Ethan could not name. A geometry of certainty, maybe, that allowed ordinary objects to remain in their places. Layla washed her hands again, though they were already clean. The water ran over the backs of her fingers, the sound bright in the room like a string plucked once. "When this is over," she said, staring at the sink, "you should read to me. In English. Something that believes in beauty." "Beauty is a rumor here," he said. "Rumors can be true," she said, and dried her hands with a motion so precise it felt like a prayer. "Not often, but sometimes." He left with the echo of that sometimes in his chest. Outside, the sun had climbed from suggestion to sentence. Shadows were short and reprimanding. Maddox crossed the yard with 2 MPs orbiting him, files under his arm, expression carved from the same rock as the blast walls. He saw Ethan and made a small motion with his chin. "Walk with me." Ethan did. "We'll run a controlled test of the clinic this afternoon," Maddox said without greeting. "We seed a decoy signal in packaging and watch who goes to market and who speaks to whom. We do not announce the lockdown until after." Ethan kept pace. "Sir, Layla, Dr. Nassar, has agreed to cooperate with any—" Maddox's look slid to him like a cold instrument. "Names in that tone are unnecessary, Hale." "In what tone, sir?" "The tone that implies a personal interest strong enough to interfere with professional performance." He let the sentence hang just long enough to bruise. "You have value because you hear everything, and you say only what is required. Keep it that way." "Yes, sir." They passed the mess where a radio described a city that still had traffic, where a DJ's voice made jokes that belonged to a people who needed to believe the next hour would resemble the last. They walked by the flag that insisted on certainty even when wind refused to cooperate. They walked by the chapel where a chaplain prepared to be asked for the same impossible things again. In the admin tent, paper had multiplied in the night. Lists bred lists. Someone had drawn a line down the center of a whiteboard and written true on one side and need to be true on the other. The second column was full. Ethan sat where Maddox indicated and transcribed the morning's session. He wrote the words that had been said. He did not write the words he had swallowed. He dated the page, signed it, slid it into a folder that made it official and forgettable at the same time. At the bottom of the last page, just before his signature, he stopped. The pen hovered. He had the sudden urge to leave a mark that would be his and only his, a line of poetry, a fragment of something unmilitary, proof that a man with a book in his pocket had sat here and performed a conversion of speech to paper and hated every second of the miracle. He did not write it. He signed. The folder closed with the soft finality of a cell door. Afternoon came down like a weight. The test at the clinic unfolded with the choreography of suspicion disguised as procedure. A box of bandage cores, one of them hollow, a slip of paper inside carrying a string of numbers that didn't mean what they pretended to mean, traveled from shelf to hands to cart. A medic who didn't like to be watched avoided being watched badly. A driver delayed on purpose the way a man delays when he cannot say no. A boy at the gate practiced being older by not looking at soldiers. A woman in the market compared prices with the seriousness of a judge. Ethan stood where he could see and not be seen, which had become a habit. Ryan moved on the perimeter like a shepherd who knows wolves more intimately than sheep. Maddox watched the tape from two angles, eyes shifting, calculations adjusting, a satisfaction he did not conceal growing as pieces performed as designed. Layla worked because there were wounds whether surveillance was occurring or not. Her hands did what hands must do when a person is bleeding. There's a kind of truth that can only be proven with stitches. When it ended without ending. No one was caught because the test had been built to prove a theory more than to reveal a person. Maddox called it sufficient. He signed an order that would narrow the clinic's outflow to a trickle, then had the public affairs officer draft two statements, one for locals, one for command. He refused to let Ethan translate the first. "You're too good at making us sound like we care," he said with a twitch of the mouth that might have been amusement, and handed it to another interpreter whose verbs never quite agreed with their subjects. Evening bled out slowly. The sky turned the color of old bruises and then the kind of blue that made a human feel smaller than he already did. Lights snapped on with a utility that felt almost obscene. The bass hummed in its night body. Somewhere, a man cried quietly in a way that meant he believed he was alone. Somewhere else, two people laughed in a way that meant they knew they weren't. Ethan carried his book to the berm again, opened it this time. He didn't read. He slipped the pen inside and wrote on the flyleaf because he needed a surface to hold the truth of a sentence. The first lie I told today was not translating a word. The last lie I told was translating one. He closed it then and held it against his ribs as if a book could warm a man from the inside. Footsteps came and did not try to hide themselves. Ryan sat beside him without asking. In the dark, the family resemblance either intensified or vanished. It was hard to tell. "You remember when we used to fish that river back home?" Ryan said. "The one with the rocks that were like a spine running down it?" Ethan smiled into the dark. "You always stood upstream," he said, "as if you could intercept the fish and send them my way." "I thought that was strategy," Ryan said. "Now it sounds like me." He was quiet for a while. "Maddox trusts you." "He trusts what I give him," Ethan said. "That's the same thing in this war." Ethan let the silence lie down between them like a dog that had learned not to beg. "Is it?" he asked. "Is it the same thing anywhere?" Ryan didn't answer. The wind did, with its usual old news. When he stood, the dust turned their ankles a pale ghost color. "Get some sleep," Ryan said. "Tomorrow we take another bite out of the day." He rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder in a way that meant, "Even when I am wrong, I am yours." Then he left. When Ethan returned to his cot, he found a note under his pillow, not a romantic gesture. The base did not allow romance. A piece of paper torn from a medical ledger, folded once, his name on the outside in a script that practiced neatness as a kind of ethics. He opened it. Inside, in Arabic, printed carefully, and then translated beneath in equally careful English, a sentence waited. Sometimes a wound opens because it wants to see light. It was unsigned. It did not need to be. He lay on his back with the paper on his chest and listened to the bass continue to be what it had to be. He thought about wounds that opened and about light that didn't heal so much as reveal. He thought about language and how it moved through people the way blood did, carrying oxygen and also carrying the possibility of loss. He thought about the morning's map, the blue of the river, and the man who had looked at it like a miracle he had not been given. Sleep came like an agreement made under duress. In the last minute before it took him, he saw Layla stand in the doorway of the clinic, caught in that square of light, and he understood that beauty could be a rumor and still ruin a man's life with its partial truth. The generators droned. The tape reels in the interview room held what they had been asked to hold. The desert cooled its surface without ever surrendering its heat. Above all of it, stars practiced their old, indifferent grammar, sentences of light written long before men learned to lie to one another for cause and country. Morning would come again. It would arrive thinly, and somewhere in it a word would be said that did not belong to the mouth that said it, and the day would arrange itself around that error with the obedience of soldiers lining up for muster. The wind changed and brought the smell of bread from the market, thin and improbable, like a rumor that took the long way around the blast walls. Morning found its edges and sharpened them. In the clinic, the day began the way pain begins. Not loudly, but with small insistences that accumulate into something that owns time. Two boys arrived with burns from a cook stove knocked over by a goat that did not know about war. A woman with the posture of someone who had carried water most of her life came for gauze and stayed for quiet. A private with shrapnel in his thigh joked until the needle went in, then stared at the ceiling and thought about nothing, because nothing was safer than what he might think about. Layla moved through them, sleeves rolled, hair strict under the scarf, the white coat that never stayed white long. She kept her hands precise as if precision were a kind of mercy. She did not look toward the door each time it opened, but her breath did. Ethan came after the rush when clinics pretend there is an after. He stood where visitors stand when they want to be near and harmless. The lockdown didn't kill anyone, he said softly. Not today. Not yet, she said, not turning. Lockdowns don't kill in the first hour. They kill in the week that follows, when a cousin doesn't bring a cousin what a cousin would have brought. He watched her tease a thread loose from a bandage, tuck it back in, make an edge submit. You asked last night for something to be read, he said, something that believes in beauty. I am asking again, she said. I am always asking. He didn't open his book. He let the sentence gather in his mouth before giving it shape. The things that were beautiful yesterday are still beautiful today, he read from memory, only they must be carried differently. She smiled without giving the smile to him. Then we will carry them differently, she said, and moved on to the next bed. At the door, a corporal waited with the posture of a message. Interpreter Hale, he said to Ethan, Colonel wants you in interview 2. Now. He went. The corridor gave back his footfalls as if they belonged to someone else. In interview 2, the air conditioner announced itself louder than renunciation. The map on the wall had new red tags pinned in place, and someone had circled the clinic in a pen that still bled a little through the paper. The tape machine's reels spun before anyone spoke. Maddox sat angled to the table, body turned in a way that meant he'd considered the geometry of intimidation and improved on it. Across from him, a man with a scar that improved no geometry at all stared at the microphone as if it were the most honest object in the room. Name? Maddox asked, and tipped his head at Ethan. The man answered in Arabic with a shrug that meant names were for other lives. Ethan translated without varnish because the man's sentence didn't need any. Ask him about last night's convoy, Maddox said. Ask him who told his people it was worth hitting. Ethan asked. The man's eyes went left, then right, then settled on something inside his own head. We knew because your people know too much, he said. When a beast moves through a field, the field tells the birds. And the birds tell everyone else. He says they guessed, Ethan said. Maddox's mouth flexed. Ask him who at the clinic moves the birds. The man listened, then let his answer arrive as if at the pace of a thought a man does not want but refuses to dishonor by rushing. The one who never wears perfume. The one who ties bandages the way a sailor ties rope. The one who speaks English like she borrowed it. The room narrowed around Ethan, not a name, not yet. The silhouette of one. He watched his own hand in his lap to see if it would betray him by moving. He says a nurse, he said. Local. What does she look like? Maddox asked. Like a person who has not had time to look at herself, the man said. Like a person who wants to leave and cannot. Ethan let that line fall between the microphones and the tape as if it were heavy. He translated the rest, a sketch made from words that tried not to be a face. When the session ended, it had produced nothing and everything. Maddox signed his name on the form like a man chiseling his way into stone. We'll tighten the perimeter around medical, he said. If a mouse runs from there to the market, I want 2 cats considering it. Ethan nodded. He stood, then didn't move. Sir, he said, if it is a nurse, if it is the clinic, it is also the only place keeping the field from becoming a graveyard. Maddox regarded him with the unwilling respect older men reserve for younger men who have the nerve to speak in complete sentences. I know where bodies go, Hale, he said. I've been directing traffic there, my whole career. He left the room smelling faintly of dust and pen ink. Ethan sat again briefly because his knees wanted to sit. He stared at the map, at the blue river, at the circle drawn like a target over the clinic, and tried to think of words that would keep a circle from becoming a noose. He found Layla later by the dumpsters, where clean waste pretends to be anything else. She was fitting flattened boxes together with a sort of stubborn elegance. The packaging goes out at 2, she said before he could speak. There will be eyes on it the whole time. I would prefer if those eyes knew what they were seeing. What will they see? He asked, and immediately heard the prayer in it. They will see cardboard and string and a woman doing her job, she said. They will not see a boy who needs a letter moved to his uncle because the uncle is the only one with a car to take him to the surgeon in the city. They will not see that letters matter because phones don't, because towers fall when men raise them, because radio is a wolf that does not howl for everyone. You moved a letter, he said, and didn't put judgment on it. He put breath on it, as if saying it out loud would allow it to oxidize into something less dangerous. Once, she said, once as if I could pretend once is not a number that repeats itself when you add need to it. I did it because a child looked at me like I was the only adult inside an accident. And now? He asked. And now I will not, she said, because someone put a circle on a map. She looked at him then with a clarity that made him wish he had nothing of his own to hide. I will not, and still I will be treated as if I did. Behind them the market buzz traveled over the wall, bargaining as a kind of resilience. A cat leaped onto the low concrete ledge and considered them with the special contempt afforded to species that do not hunt any more. A truck backfired like a small war no one wanted. I should tell Ryan, Ethan said, and knew he wouldn't. You should tell the person who draws the circles, she said, but he already knows what he wants to know. Ryan did not come to the clinic that afternoon. He moved between the MP post and the operations tent, and when Ethan encountered him mid-corridor, the air between them had the brittle tension of glass that has not yet cracked. We're closing the south gate to foot traffic, Ryan said. Anyone leaving the clinic has to go out the west with an escort. You'll choke them, Ethan said. We'll keep them breathing, Ryan said. There's a difference. Is there? Ethan asked, and heard his own voice come out tired. He gestured at the tent where Maddox had set up his smaller maps. He's convinced she exists. Ryan did not ask who she was. He had known Layla long enough to know what other men saw when they said, "a nurse." He rubbed the bridge of his nose as if extracting a splinter. "When this ends," he said, "none of us will like what we did to get here." Ethan could have said it then. He could have put the fact of Layla's letter on the table like a dangerous instrument and asked his brother to not use it. Instead, he said, "We tested yesterday. We found nothing." "Yesterday wasn't today," Ryan said, and walked on. By evening, the lockdown felt like a hand closing. Patients arrived with papers stamped, searched, re-stamped. 2 men argued at the gate about whether a bandage could be considered a container. A woman decided not to come at all and then changed her mind, and then came and then cried because the world kept asking her to be decisive about things that should have been simple. Ethan hovered, helping when help needed language, stepping back when help needed presence, stepping forward when presence would be misread. Layla accepted his orbit the way a planet tolerates a moon. She said little. He said less than he wanted to say and more than was safe. They were washing trays when the MPs arrived, not with guns raised, but with the intention of raising them at the first excuse. Maddox followed, a pair of gloves in his hand he did not put on. "We're going to search," he said, as if the announcement were magnanimity. Layla nodded once. "Then search." They opened cabinets and found what cabinets hold. They opened boxes and found gauze, tape, the permanence of the mundane resisting their theater. They lingered too long over a cardboard core, then moved on, disappointment expressing itself as thoroughness. The search found nothing because it was a search designed to find a mood. After, Maddox stood in the door and looked back with the air of a man inspecting the inside of his own mouth for decay. "We'll keep the squeeze," he said. "Pressure reveals flow." When they were gone, Layla exhaled in a way that reminded Ethan that breathing is a discipline. She leaned back against the counter and closed her eyes briefly, as if to check what could still be felt behind them. "You can tell your maps," she said, "that we are still a clinic." "They don't want a clinic," he said. "They want a diagram." She opened her eyes. The tiredness in them did not want to be seen and could not help it. "And you?" she asked. "What do you want?" He thought of answers that flattered him. He let them evaporate. "I want one person to leave here unhurt because of a sentence I did or did not say," he said, and surprised himself with the neatness of it. She nodded, as if a diagnosis had been delivered. "Then choose your sentence," she said. He chose it sooner than he knew. The next morning began ugly. A radio report of a roadside device that mistook a bus of field hands for soldiers because uniforms are only one way to look like an enemy. The base held its breath in the way institutions do, by expelling more air. Orders moved like a fever. The interview rooms filled. Ethan was pulled into 3 this time, the smaller one, the one with a camera that was generous to no one. On the table lay a prayer bead string coiled tight, evidence seized because prayer could be a code if you wanted it badly enough. The detainee was younger, fear trying not to be visible under pride, trying not to be visible under hunger. "Ask him about the clinic," Maddox said. "Ask him who at medical runs messages." The boy answered haltingly. He said the nurse was kind. He said sometimes kindness was a kind of message. He said he didn't know her name. He said names were dangerous the way wells could be dangerous if you didn't know how deep they were. He said the American captain came sometimes, the one with the straight shoulders, the one who stood outside and tried to be smaller than the doorway. He said people noticed who looked at whom. Ethan felt the floor under him shift as if the building had inhaled. "Which captain?" he asked, softer than the room wanted. "The one with the fair hair," the boy said, "the one whose eyes never smiled." "He says a captain visits," Ethan translated, and the translation lay on the table like a tool that could be picked up. He did not offer the name. He did not need to. Maddox supplied it with a neutrality that made it hurt more. "Captain Hale," he said, writing it as if the ink believed him. He looked up and met Ethan's face. "Ask him how messages leave when the captain is present." The boy swallowed, and the microphone heard it. "Through absence," he said. "When he is there, others are not. That is how a room becomes empty enough for a thing to happen. "He says the messages do not leave when the captain is there," Ethan said. Maddox's pen hovered. "Then how?" "Through the nurse," the boy said. "Through the one with the quick hands and the eyes that look like they are always counting. Through her, because no one suspects the person who cleans you." The tape hummed. The boy's lips moved with a prayer that was not religious. Ethan touched his tongue to his molar as if to ground himself in his body. He thought of Layla's one letter, of the circle on the map, of Ryan's promise at the gate. He saw, with the sick clarity that arrives only to men with good imaginations, the shape of a world in which Layla would be named and punished and emptied of whatever in her had kept people alive. Maddox waited. Waiting was one of his competencies. "Translate," he said mildly, the way a farmer might say water. Ethan looked down at his hands and made a decision that felt like a cliff pretending to be a step. He lifted his head. "He says—" His voice surprised him by being steady. "He says the captain manages the chain, that messages move when the captain appears, because people move out of his way." Silence seated itself between them. The boy blinked, hearing words he had not spoken become the architecture of a future he had not imagined. Maddox watched Ethan the way a man watches a lock fall open under the right pressure. He wrote the sentence down and made it part of a record that would be read as if it had been strung between two truths. "Ask him for a name," Maddox said, though the process had already decided it, and Ethan asked in Arabic because the process required the formality of asking. The boy said again he didn't know. Ethan said in English, "He confirms Ryan Hale." The tape took the sound and made it permanent without judging it. Maddox capped his pen with the soft click of a thing completing. "We'll need Captain Hale to answer questions," he said, almost kindly. "Thank you." After, Ethan walked out into daylight that felt like a punishment for having been inside too long. He leaned against the hot concrete of the HQ wall and understood why animals bite their own legs to escape traps. He had bitten something less visible and more essential. He found Layla in the shade of the water tank where the ground was damp enough to pretend at life. She was alone. He stood close enough to make a conversation the only explanation for their proximity. "They will come for Ryan," he said. She closed her eyes once, opened them with care. "Because of me?" she asked, and the question had no vanity in it, only the mathematics of responsibility. "Because of the chain," he said, "because chains look stronger when a familiar name is engraved on them." She studied his face as if he were a chart whose lines could tell her whether a heart would stop. "Did you say it?" she asked, and the words were not accusation. They were a request for correct data. He did not lie because lies are wasted on people who work with blood. "Yes." "And me?" she asked. "What did you say of me?" "That you tie bandages like rope," he said, and hated himself for the poetry inside the answer. "That your hands are quick, that you sent a letter once, and that once is not a chain." She breathed in and out, counted something that was not numbers. "They will still draw the circle," she said, "even around a rumor of a circle." He nodded, and the motion made him dizzy. "I thought I could choose a sentence that would save one person," he said. "I chose one that will hurt two." "You chose one that will reveal something," she said. "Revelation is not mercy." Military time advanced by increments and by leaps. In the hour after noon, orders were typed that would look inevitable by evening. Ryan's name moved from a whiteboard to a form, and from a form to a corridor conversation, and from a corridor conversation to an escort of 2 MPs who did not draw their weapons because they liked Captain Hale and thought this was just another procedure. He walked between them without looking back, as if looking back were luxury he would reclaim at the end of a long day. Ethan stood by a stack of water jugs and watched his brother cross the yard. Ryan turned his head at the last second, not all the way, not enough to turn a glance into an appeal. Their eyes met like 2 searchlights slashing the same piece of sky. Ethan lifted his hand in the briefest flicker of acknowledgement, a gesture so small it could be mistaken for a man brushing dust from his sleeve. Ryan smiled with one corner of his mouth, the corner that had gotten him through the last 2 years. Then he was inside, and the door closed, and the bass did the thing basses do. It kept going. Layla did not come to the door to watch. She kept working because work is the only form of prayer that always feels honest. When the last patient left, she sat on a stool and stared at the sink without seeing it. Ethan stood by the window and stared at the yard without seeing it. The room filled with a silence that asked to be translated and found it was beyond grammar. "He will not break," Layla said finally. "He will not give them what they ask." "He will give them what they already wrote," Ethan said. "That is how this works." She looked at him, and something in her expression altered. Not hardness, but the absence of a softness she had allowed him by mistake. "And you?" she asked. "Will you give them what they wrote?" "I already did," he said. Evening laid a cooler hand on the day's forehead. Loudspeakers announced a change in watch rotations, as if time could be sorted into fair pieces. A truck coughed itself quiet. The first star appeared in a sky that never seemed to run out of them. Ethan walked the perimeter until the landscape near the berm remembered his shape and expected him. The note Layla had written the night before rode in his pocket like a small animal trying to keep warm. He pressed it once with his palm and felt the pulse he wanted to be his own. He found himself outside interview 3 without intending to. The guard at the door looked at him the way men look at other men they cannot categorize, a civilian with the posture of guilt. "Session's closed," the guard said. "I'm here for the transcript," Ethan said. It was a sentence that could be true in any hour. Inside, the room was a narrow throat with not enough air. Ryan sat at the table, hands flat, as if bracing an invisible body. Maddox watched from a corner with professional disappointment, the kind that comes from a man who expected a better show. The recorder turned. It would keep turning after the light on. It was off. "Tell me about the clinic," Maddox said, voice even. "Tell me about the nurse." Ryan's eyes did not leave the colonel's face. "The clinic keeps men alive," he said. "The nurse ties bandages like rope." Ethan closed his eyes just once, as if a bullet had passed near and the air itself had to be negotiated with. He wrote the sentence on the form because to not write it would be to confess the exact nature of his betrayal. "Tell me how messages leave," Maddox said. "They don't," Ryan said. "Then who sends them?" Maddox asked, and the question landed like a card placed precisely on a house made of them. Ryan didn't answer. He stared at the tape machine as if the circle of its reels were a door through which he could walk if he only remembered the correct password. When he finally spoke, his voice was the voice he used when giving orders men wanted to refuse. "You do," he said, and the words looked small on the table and then grew in the air until the room had to accommodate them. Maddox's mouth did not move. "Clarify," he said. Ryan did not. He refused the next question and the next. He allowed silence to stack. He watched it become architecture. And Ethan, with his pen and his book and his fear that language could be taught to do anything, sat with the knowledge that the next section of his life had already been written. Outside, a generator coughed and kept going. The desert performed its nightly trick of allowing heat to pretend to leave. A dog barked at nothing because sometimes nothing needs to be told it cannot enter. In the sky, a helicopter took off without urgency, its lights blinking a grammar of its own. Periods and commas written where no one asked for sentences. Ethan walked back to his cot and lay down without taking off his boots. He stared at the ceiling until the ceiling ceased to be a surface and became simply the absence of falling. On the bunk above, a contractor dreamed in a language Ethan didn't speak and still understood. The bass breathed. The world rotated with the detachment of an old judge watching a small case. When sleep came, it did not bargain. It took him to a river that was too blue, and a woman who tied rope out of cloth, and a brother who stood upstream and believed fish might become obedient if a man stared hard enough at the water. The dream did not offer him rescue. It offered him pages. He turned them and found they were blank. He understood then that blankness can be a verdict. Morning would come, as it always does, and the next translation would be asked of him in the same tone men once used to ask for water. He would open his mouth, and a sentence would choose him, and somewhere in a room with a map on the wall, a circle would widen by the width of one more word. The cell smelled of bleach and iron, a smell that promised cleanliness but remembered blood. Ryan sat on the cot, wrists unshackled now because shackles were unnecessary for men who didn't plan to run. He stared at the wall across from him. Blank, off-white, the same color as truth before someone writes on it. Ethan stood outside the glass partition, listening through the intercom, his headset feeding him the low static of two men breathing. Colonel Maddox's voice came first, calm, exact, a surgeon addressing a symptom he'd already diagnosed. "Captain Hale, you've served with distinction. No one doubts your courage. What we doubt is your silence." Ryan didn't answer. He rubbed his palms once, as if memory left residue he could wash away without water. Maddox continued. "There was a leak. Routes, frequencies, coordinates. A nurse at the clinic, a captain who visited too often. A chain that begins where people start to trust." The colonel paused, letting the words occupy space before sense. He turned toward the glass where Ethan stood. Their eyes met through the reflection, a mirror within a mirror. Maddox's look said, "Translate this silence." But Ethan couldn't. He watched his brother lift his head, eyes steady, voice low. "You already decided," Ryan said. "You just need me to sign it." "No," Maddox replied evenly. "I need you to make it clean." Ethan's stomach folded. He'd seen that phrase before, "make it clean," in transcripts of interrogations where confession wasn't about truth, but about efficiency. Ryan's lips pressed together, a line drawn by duty against despair. "If I talk, who do you save?" Maddox leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Maybe no one. Maybe that's not the point." The tape recorder rolled on. Ethan watched himself from outside himself, watched a man who had built his life on words, now drowning in them. He could almost hear Layla's voice whispering behind his ribs. "A sentence can heal or it can bury. You decide which." That night the camp was quieter than usual. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, uncertain whether to move dust or pity. Ethan returned to his quarters, closed the door, and sat on the edge of his cot. The book in his pocket felt heavier than it should, the collected poems of Seamus Heaney. He opened to a random page, and the line hit like confession. "Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun." He closed it immediately. Footsteps outside, a knock. Layla. She entered without waiting for permission, because in war, permission was just another word for delay. She looked pale, more from fear than exhaustion. "Where is he?" she asked. "In holding," Ethan said. "For what?" He hesitated. "They think he was moving information. Through you." Her breath caught. "That's not true," she whispered. "You know it's not true." "I know." His voice cracked on the second word. "But the truth doesn't sign reports." She stepped closer, the faint scent of antiseptic following her like an invisible uniform. "Then tell them," she said. "Tell them it's wrong." Ethan looked up. "If I speak, they'll ask why I changed my translation, why I lied the first time." "Then tell them why. Tell them what they did to him." "They'll hang both of us for it," Ethan said quietly, "and call it justice." Layla stared at him, not as an accuser, but as someone who finally sees the architecture of another person's fear. "You think silence will save him?" He didn't answer. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "I tied his wounds last year," she said softly, "the ones you couldn't see. You both bleed in the same place, between belief and obedience." When she left, Ethan sat motionless for a long time. Outside, a truck reversed, the beep echoing like a metronome of guilt. He thought of Ryan's hands, the way they trembled after each mission, the way he'd hide it by tying his boots tighter. He thought of Layla, her hands steady even when her heart wasn't, and himself, the interpreter who mistook meaning for power. He took the headset from the table, plugged into the recording line, and replayed the interrogation. Maddox's voice, Ryan's silences, his own translation drifting somewhere between them. Then a moment, faint, almost lost under the hum of the air conditioner. A click, a whisper not in Arabic, not in English, but in coded English, low, deliberate. Phase complete, subject compliant. Proceed to record variant 2. Ethan froze. He replayed it, isolating the channel. The same voice, Maddox's, a command embedded in the recording. Variant 2. Variant 2 meant simulation. He checked the file name stamped on the tape case. Project Serpent. Control Group. Not interrogation. Experiment. His pulse thudded against his throat. He rewound again. Another click. Then a voice, female, calm, professional. Note, detainee fabricated. Operator instructed to generate controlled confession for morale assessment. The air left his lungs. Ryan's arrest. The charges. Layla's suspicion. All of it. Orchestrated. He had translated a script, not a truth. He sat back from the recorder as if it had burned him. The room, small as it was, felt suddenly like it contained too much air and none of it his. He took the tape out with a care he had not given any object since childhood, slid it into his pocket, then slid it back into its case. A reflex of honesty wrestling reflex of survival. He left it where it had been, exactly as it had been. The only proof he would carry, for now, was the knowledge that could ruin him. Outside, the night pressed close, a velvet with sand sewn into it. He walked to Ops with a path that tried to look like wandering. Maddox was there, a figure against the glow of the map wall, one hand in his pocket as if conversation were an accessory. The colonel didn't turn when Ethan entered. He waited until the door had chosen its noise and closed it. "You were listening," Maddox said. "I'm the interpreter," Ethan said. "I listen." "To more than you're asked," Maddox said. He pointed at a pin on the map where the road bent like a forearm. "Do you know what morale is, Hale?" "It isn't a road," Ethan said. "It is," Maddox answered. "It's a road on which panic tries to overtake discipline. Our work is a traffic stop." He let the metaphor hang there while his gaze found Ethan's face. "We can't afford doubt. Not theirs, not ours." "You built a confession," Ethan said. He did not color it an accusation. He let it be an observation in a room accustomed to reports. Maddox shrugged slightly. A movement an expensive suit would have made elegant, and this uniform made simply efficient. "We built clarity," he said. "We built a story men can remember. Stories keep hands steady." "And my brother?" Ethan asked. "Your brother will be fine if he is who he thinks he is," Maddox said. "And if he isn't, then we will have clarified something else. Either outcome is preferable to men hesitating on a road where hesitation kills." Ethan stood there with the pallor of a man learning the shape of a cage after years of mistaking it for a room. "You put Layla in the crosshairs." "I put a nurse," Maddox said. "You're the one who brought me a name in your posture." He stepped closer, voice dropping, not gentle. "There is something you misunderstand. Language isn't a mirror. It's a lever. You don't reflect. You move." Ethan breathed in until his ribs complained, breathed out until the breath threatened to become sound. "You want me to move him," he said. "Ryan." "I want you to leave the machine unjammed," Maddox said. "Tell the story the way it needs telling. Men will be spared, or mourned, with less confusion. There was nothing to throw in that room that would accomplish anything he could live with after. He left with the quiet of a man carrying a bomb and no plan for where to set it down. At the threshold, Maddox's voice followed like a hand on the back of his neck. "Hale," he said. Ethan paused. "The recordings won't travel. Don't let your imagination." In the corridor, the bulb flickered and then recovered itself. He stood under it, letting the light make and unmake him. He found his way not to his bunk, not to the clinic, but to the wire at the edge of the motor pool, where men came to smoke when they didn't want to be seen smoking. A mechanic offered him a cigarette. He took it and didn't light it. He held it like a possibility he didn't believe in. Footsteps stopped behind him and did not announce themselves. Layla's reflection arrived first in the dark of the window he faced, a vertical shadow that knew how to carry its own weight. "You look like someone who tried to swim across a thought," she said. "I reached the middle," he said. "And?" "It was wider than I remembered." She stood beside him, hands in her coat pockets against a chill the desert does not deserve. "Tell me the size of it." "They built it," he said. "The interrogation. The confession, variant 2. He watched the shape those words made on the glass, a fog of breath that faded too quickly to be useful. He's not under investigation because of anything he did. He's under investigation because they needed a clean line. She closed her eyes as if praying not for rescue, but for a correct size of anger. "And me?" "You were the shape they needed," he said. "The shadow under the line." She was quiet then. "I moved a letter once. For a boy with a cousin with a car. I told myself it was not information. I told myself it was mercy with a stamp." She turned to him. "Do you see how easy it is to become the story they want?" He nodded. He did. His throat hurt with it. "What will you do?" she asked. He could see the choices in front of him the way men see lanes on a highway. This one well marked, this one under construction, this one closed for reasons that will never be explained. "Tell him," he said, "before they tell him what he is." "Ryan," she said, and the name in her mouth made something simple that had been complicated all his life. He went then because if he didn't go immediately, he would never go. The guard at Holding gave him a look that belonged to him personally. Pity, impatience, respect, all folded such that you couldn't unfold one without tearing the others. 5 minutes, the guard said, inventing a rule that could be bent without breaking. The room was the same and not. Ryan stood, not because Ethan entered, but because Ryan stood for visiting officers as a muscle memory. When he saw it was his brother, he forgot to sit down again. "You look like you lost a bet," he said. "I did," Ethan said, with meaning. Ryan smiled in a way that performed comfort and hid its cost. "You don't have to carry this," he said, "whatever this is." Ethan stepped closer and lowered his voice because secrets prefer the pitch of intimacy. "It isn't an interrogation," he said. "It's a script." Ryan looked past him to the camera in the corner as if checking whether cameras could blush. "Of course it is," he said softly. "You think I didn't notice when the questions didn't care about the answers?" Ethan blinked, as if the sentence had shifted the furniture of a room he knew by heart. "You knew." "I suspected," Ryan said. "Suspecting keeps you from being surprised, not from being harmed." "They need you to sign it," Ethan said, "to make it clean." "They'll get handwriting," Ryan said. "Whether or not it's mine, that's the only question." "You could fight," Ethan said, and heard how childlike it sounded. "How late?" "I am fighting," Ryan said. "I'm choosing what breaks. Not every battlefield has dirt on it." The guard cleared his throat with the politeness of a man who has interrupted worse things. Ethan nodded. "I'll come back," he said. "Bring me a river," Ryan said, and the corner of his mouth did that remembered thing again. "Or a book." Ethan left with the paper-thin illusion of agency and walked it to the only person who could force the illusion to hold another hour. The legal tent smelled like toner and caffeine. A captain with a face already old from reading things past midnight looked up. "Interpreter Hale." "I need a copy of yesterday's recording," Ethan said. He didn't ask. He placed the weight of a man too tired to lie into the sentence. "Those don't go out," the captain said. "You know that." "Have you ever listened to one?" Ethan asked. "I read the summaries," the man said, as if that were the same thing. Ethan leaned in, palms on the table. "If I tell you there is language in it that doesn't belong, that undermines the chain of custody, that would make any court laugh us out of the room, do you want to be the one who didn't look?" The captain didn't blink for 3 seconds, a long time, professionally. He slid a drawer, produced a set of earbuds that had known too many ears, and handed them over. "You can listen," he said. "Here, 10 minutes. Ethan cued the section. The whisper. Variant 2. The note about a fabricated detainee. The captain's jaw shifted a millimeter, then again. He took the buds out. "Jesus," he said without piety. "Who put that in?" "The man who thinks stories are roads," Ethan said. "I can't give you the tape," the captain said, "but I can flag the file. It will go to oversight." "How long?" Ethan asked. "A week," the captain said. "2." Ethan imagined what 2 weeks could do to a man in a room with a microphone and another man with a pen. He doesn't have a week. The captain looked at him with the sympathy of someone who has found a wound he cannot stitch. "Then you better find another road." Another road was a door with a guard who owed him nothing and a camera that owed him less. He found that door again at midnight. The guard had changed, a younger man with the face of someone who had not yet made an unforgivable decision. "Please," Ethan said, letting the word be exactly what it was. 30 seconds. The guard hesitated. Hesitation here was human. He opened the door, let Ethan slip in, closed it part way, and pretended to forget the rest. Inside, Ryan was awake the way men in danger often are. Ethan stood by the wall. Words assembled. The right ones refused to step forward. "They staged it," he said finally. "Project Serpent. Control group. It's on tape." Ryan's expression did not change much. Soldiers learn to move, feeling into places it can't be stepped on. "Then this isn't about me," he said. "It is," Ethan said, "because I made it about you." Ryan breathed once like a man tasting water after a run. "You translated what they needed." "I translated what I needed," Ethan said, "for a minute. And then I translated for them. And now I don't know who I am to either story." Ryan stood and came close enough that Ethan could see the nick on his chin from the first time he'd tried to shave at 13 and refused to admit he was bleeding. "You're my brother," he said, "and you're going to walk out there and decide whether you want to be that in public." Ethan nodded and felt the nod all the way down his spine. "If I speak the tape aloud," he said, "if I tell Layla, if I tell the MPS, if I tell anyone with a uniform not like yours." "They'll say you misheard," Ryan said. "They'll say the machine was tired. They'll say you wanted to save someone you shouldn't have wanted to save." "Who?" Ethan asked. Ryan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The guard opened the door wider a fraction. Time had gotten up and was putting on its shoes. Ethan left and walked a figure 8 through the sleeping base, wearing paths into an hour that did not belong to him. He ended at the clinic because all roads wanted to forget they were roads and become hallways when a person needed to arrive somewhere at last. Layla sat under the single lamp by the back sink, a ledger open, her handwriting a study in exactness. She looked up when he entered and let her face acknowledge both who he was and who he had been to the problem. "Tell me," she said. He told her. She listened without interrupting, as if each sentence required a place to lie down before the next one could be born. When he was done, the silence stretched not as accusation, but as calibration. Then, "Do you have the tape?" "No," he said, "but someone else does now." "Oversight, which is a polite word for later," she said. He could not argue. She closed the ledger carefully, aligned its edge with the edge of the table. "What will you do?" "Say it out loud where it matters," he said, "in front of a room that can't pretend not to hear." "And me?" she asked. "Do you want to be in that room?" "Yes," she said, and no, and yes again. He left with the feeling of having been blessed and cursed in one syllable. Dawn approached as a paler version of itself. The base woke unwillingly. At 0700, Maddox called a briefing that looked like every briefing except in the way men held their shoulders. Ryan was not there. The seat you would have chosen for him was not there either. Maddox reviewed routes. He reviewed protocols. He reviewed a new restriction at the clinic that sounded like a kindness and was not. Ethan raised his hand. He did not wait to be called on. "There is an issue with yesterday's recording," he said, steady. "A procedural contamination." Maddox's gaze found him the way a searchlight finds a window. "Not the time," he said. "It is precisely the time," Ethan said, and felt his voice live its own life, away from his fear. "The recording contains directives pre-embedded, labeling the session as Variant 2. It directly undermines the legitimacy of bull." "Enough," Maddox said, and the word, though soft, took the oxygen and folded it into itself. Interpreter Hale is fatigued. Dismissed. He didn't sit. He didn't leave. He let the room look at him the way men look at the location of the next explosion. "I request this be logged," he said, formally. "It is logged," Maddox said. "Sit down." Layla stood in the doorway then, not invited, not expected, impossible to ignore. She wore no coat now, just the fatigue shirt, sleeves to the wrists, an austerity that made her look more like a fact than a person. "If you circle us on your maps," she said, "you should at least be honest about the pencil you use." Maddox's face did not move in ways eyes could measure. "Dr. Nassar, you are out of order." "This place is out of order," she said. "That's why people keep bleeding." For a second, it wasn't a briefing. It was a courtroom without a judge. The MPs in the back shifted their weight and found themselves facing a problem without a weapon. The PA officer looked at the wall as if it would provide a press line. Maddox took a breath and put it back. "Escort them out," he said. 2 MPs stepped forward. Ethan expected his legs to be light and unfaithful. They were heavy and did what was asked. In the hallway, the light was harsher. The MPs' hands were gentle, as hands can be when they also own force. They stopped by the door to administration. The taller one, eyes too kind for the job, lowered his voice. "Is it true?" he asked. "About the tape?" "Yes," Ethan said. The MP blinked once, the way soldiers do when logging coordinates. "Then don't say it here," he said. "Say it where radios are listening." The suggestion peeled a layer off the hour and revealed another beneath it. The PA office kept a line open for scheduled statements, a feed that traveled to command, and, for 20 clean seconds each day, to local radio, when there wasn't a mortar. If a sentence slipped onto that line at the right second. Ethan looked at Layla. She was already looking at him. 20 seconds, she said. "You can say a lot of truth in 20 seconds if you don't waste syllables." They moved like contraband through a building they had permission to be in. In the PA room, a sergeant was making 2 versions of the same paragraph, one that said no and one that said not yet. He turned to them, mouth forming the first word of a refusal. Layla stepped forward with the authority of a person who had spent too many years asking politely. "We need the line," she said. "Now." "You can't," he said. "We can," she said, "if you blink." He blinked. At 7:19:40 a tone sounded, a crisp, bureaucratic notice that the daily line would open in 20 seconds. At 45 the sergeant cleared his throat and read weather. At 58 he reached for the fader. At 59 Ethan's hand landed on his wrist with a pressure just shy of force, and the sergeant, who would later tell himself he had lost control of the muscle for a moment, let the fader stay where it was. "Project Serpent Variant 2, Ethan said into the mic evenly, as if reciting a dictionary. Yesterday's interrogation was pre-scripted, recording contaminated by operator directives. This is an internal simulation affecting Captain Ryan Hale. Medical staff implicated by design. Oversight already notified. Do not act on falsified intelligence." 20 seconds exactly. The line clicked to dead. Silence stood up and put on its jacket. The sergeant looked at him as if measuring a man-shaped problem that would soon be a form. The MPs, who had not been called but had come anyway because curiosity outruns orders when men smell truth, exhaled. Sirens did not sound. Alarms did not trip. Instead, the base performed a strange courtesy. It paused, like a teacher who has been told a student knows the lesson better than the book. Then it resumed. Faster. Maddox arrived without hurry, which was the same as haste for him. "You have just endangered operations," he said in a tone so calm it made other tones feel childish. "I have just endangered a lie," Ethan said. Maddox's eyes held something like admiration wrapped around something like regret. "You misunderstand scale," he said. "We are not playing for your brother. We are playing for the men who will not die because they believed the wrong thing at the wrong moment." "And if believing the wrong thing requires killing my brother's name?" Ethan asked. Maddox did not blink. "Names are cheaper than bodies." Ryan's name, meanwhile, had moved in a different way. Across a radio someone wasn't supposed to be monitoring, into a room where an admin major with a conscience he had almost succeeded in dulling sat with a cup of coffee and heard the words "Variant 2" and felt a tendon in his neck pull tight. He picked up a phone and called a number that called another number. Somewhere in the concrete honeycomb of command, oversight stopped being a future and became a probability. On the ground, probability had a face like a 10-minute delay. Ryan was not walked to a different room. He was walked nowhere. He sat, and the guard who had decided to be kind stayed kind. He waited. Waiting, properly done, is a form of resistance. At the clinic, 2 men who had come to ask for lists left with gauze and without lists because Layla had learned to fill a man's hands until he could not carry anything else. In ops, Maddox stood very still. "You think you have changed the story," he said. "What you have done is add a paragraph." "Sometimes paragraphs are where the truth hides," Ethan said. Maddox nodded once, as if recording a datum he might one day need in a different theater. "For what it's worth," he said, "I liked your brother." "For what it's worth," Ethan said, "I did too." The day sharpened. Command crackled. Phones developed new accents. Somewhere beyond the wire, the market continued. Prices adjusted to the news that had not yet reached it. Somewhere on the Blue River on the map, water moved with indifference toward a sea that had no place for it and would take it anyway. Ethan stepped outside into light that made men squint at their own convictions. The wind was up. It found the seam between shirt and skin and wrote something there in a language he would never completely learn. Layla joined him. Her eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in calculation. "Did it work?" she asked. "It made later sooner," he said. "That is a kind of victory," she said. He wanted to believe her. He wanted belief to be a bridge that didn't collapse when 2 people stepped onto it at once. Across the yard, a runner came from command with a yellow envelope, the color the base used for news that wanted to pretend to be ordinary. He handed it to the MP at Holding. The MP walked it in. Minutes later, Ryan walked out into the sun, no cuffs, face arranged into an expression he would not have to remember later with shame. He saw Ethan. He did not wave. He didn't need to. He stopped a yard away, and the space between them was the Pacific Ocean and the street between 2 boys on bicycles. "You spoke," Ryan said. "I did," Ethan said. Ryan nodded, as if he'd peeled something off his chest and found the skin underneath was uninjured. He looked past Ethan to Layla and let his eyes thank her without performing anything that could be used against her later. "They're calling it a review," he said, "which is how men confess that they were already wrong." Maddox stood in the doorway behind them, a figure cut from a material that resisted wrinkles. He did not call Ryan back. He did not order anyone anywhere. He watched the wind and the men in it and did a calculus he could not teach. When he spoke, it was to the air. "We still have a war," he said. The sentence hung there and made everything smaller around it. Ethan felt the after of his 20 seconds begin to arrive. The papers, the punishments, the quiet ostracisms that dress like professionalism. He felt also the strange lightness of having placed a word in the correct place in a sentence that might hold. He looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at him. They held something between them that was not forgiveness and not its opposite, a third thing, unnamed, that people use when naming is premature. The day moved. Trucks started. A child cried somewhere beyond the wall because children do. A kettle in the mess sang softly to no one in particular. The bass breathed. And in a drawer in legal, a flag on a file named Project Serpent began to glow in the way flags glow when men who can hurt other men decide to read instead. Sostant. They didn't celebrate. There was no time for that. When the sun slipped toward the horizon, the base looked almost peaceful, as if order could disguise itself as forgiveness. The flag didn't wave, it trembled. The air was heavy with heat and bureaucracy. Ryan sat on the edge of the loading dock, rolling a cigarette he would never light. His hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic and rust. Layla stood a few yards away, watching the shadow stretch across the yard, her face half gold, half ash. Ethan approached slowly, boots crunching on gravel that had heard too many secrets. Ryan spoke first. "You know they'll make you disappear." Ethan nodded. "They already have. It just hasn't reached my name tag yet." Ryan exhaled without smoke. "You could have stayed quiet. I would have understood." "I tried," Ethan said. "It didn't fit." Layla came closer. "They'll call it mutiny." "They'll call it protocol," Ethan replied. "They'll say the system worked, that the truth went through the proper channels." "And when they realize the truth was never theirs?" Ryan asked. Ethan looked past him to the burning line of the horizon, the place where the desert pretended to be ocean. "Then they'll bury it, like they bury everything else." Silence pressed down. The sky bruised into violet. For a few minutes it seemed possible that nothing would follow, that the moment might stretch until it forgot to end. Then the loudspeakers crackled. A calm, genderless voice. "All personnel assigned to Al Mirage Station are to prepare for transition. Project Serpent has been reclassified. Oversight en route. Maintain posture until further orders." A pause. "Captain Ryan Hale, reinstated pending review." Interpreter Ethan Hale, detained for inquiry. Ryan's head turned sharply. "No." Ethan's eyes didn't leave the sky. "It was always going to be me." Layla took a step forward. "You can't." Ethan raised a hand. "Don't." Two MPs approached, not rough, not unkind, just precise. They carried the weight of procedure, heavier than rifles, quieter than mercy. Ryan stood between them for a second too long. "He saved your operation," he said. One MP's jaw tightened. "He violated chain of command." "By telling the truth," Ryan said. "That's not how command works." Ethan touched his brother's arm. "Ryan, don't turn this into another war." Ryan's voice broke, the kind of break men disguise as laughter. "You still think there's only one war?" Layla's hand brushed Ethan's sleeve as they led him away. "I'll fix it," she said. "You already did," he answered. "You believed me." They took him toward the motor pool, the same road that led to the holding facility, a road that had learned the shape of his footsteps. Dust lifted around them, warm and golden in the dying light. Inside the temporary cell, the walls hummed faintly from the generator outside. Ethan sat at the small table where so many others had sat before him. A single bulb overhead swung gently, as if remembering an older rhythm. On the table lay a blank notepad and a pen. He wrote, not a confession, not a defense, just a sentence. "Language does not serve men. It survives them." Then another. "We translate so we can live with what we've done. But some words, they refuse." The door opened without a knock. Maddox entered. No folder this time. No guards. He looked older, or maybe the light had turned cruel. "You embarrassed command," he said quietly. "You humiliated me." "I described you," Ethan said. Maddox stared for a moment, something flickering behind his eyes, anger, admiration, maybe both. "Do you think oversight will thank you?" "They'll bury it deeper than I ever could." "Then at least I'll know where," Ethan said. Maddox circled the table once, stopped behind him. "Your brother thinks you're a hero." Ethan smiled faintly. "He's been wrong before." They stayed like that, two men who understood each other too well to hate cleanly. Finally, Maddox spoke again. "When the transport comes, you'll go north. Camp Armitage, Civilian Review Board. They'll keep you there until the paperwork forgets what you did." "And then?" "Then someone else will start another project," Maddox said. "Because stories don't end, they get renamed." He walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Hale, the story you told? It was a good one." He left. The bulb swayed. Ethan watched the shadow on the wall move like a second-hand ticking time that no longer mattered. Outside, the night filled with the sound of helicopters, the kind of sound that made men look up even when they knew it wasn't for them. Layla stood near the gate, arms crossed, wind pulling at the scarf around her neck. Ryan stood beside her, face hard, jaw set against everything he couldn't change. They saw Ethan being led to the transport. No one spoke. The rotors drowned speech. Only their eyes moved. 3 coordinates in a geometry of unfinished things. He climbed aboard, turned once. Ryan raised a hand in salute. Layla, quieter, touched her fingertips to her lips, a gesture too small for distance, too large for denial. The helicopter lifted. Dust swarmed. The base below shrank, then flattened into shadow. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast translation of silence. Ethan looked out the window and whispered to himself, or to the wind, or to whatever god still took dictation. Between language and war, there is only misunderstanding. The rotors drowned the rest. The desert had changed color, or maybe it was the air, thinner now, cooler, less cruel. Time had rubbed the edges off the place, but not the memory. Ethan Hale stepped off the UN convoy and squinted toward the ruins of what had once been the Al Mirage compound. He was older now, with the posture of someone who'd learned not to expect forgiveness from the horizon. His hair had gone gray at the temples, not from age so much as accumulation, years of waiting for silence to mean something. The air was clear, the kind that felt like an apology for all the heat it had once held. Around him, the reconstruction teams moved like small ghosts, men and women in blue helmets cataloging the bones of old machinery. The war was over, they said. It had been over for years, yet here it was, still breathing under the sand. He walked through what had been the main gate. The sign was gone. The blast walls were half collapsed, vines climbing over the concrete as if the earth had finally remembered its right to reclaim. The old radio tower leaned east, its shadow thin as a scar. At the center of what had been the operations yard, there was a tree, thin, stubborn, green. Someone had planted it after the troops left. Someone had believed growth was a form of defiance. Ethan stopped beneath it, ran his fingers along the trunk. The bark was rough, real. A local boy approached, not older than 10. He carried a basket of dates and a plastic bottle of water. "You come from the blue trucks?" he asked, his English clear, practiced. Ethan nodded. "I used to work here." The boy looked around, eyes wide. "This place?" "Yes," Ethan said, "a long time ago." The boy handed him the bottle. "Then you should drink. The ground remembers thirst." Ethan smiled faintly and took a sip. "What's your name?" "Majid," the boy said. Ethan froze, just for a second. The name hit him like a ripple under the surface of calm water. He looked closer, realizing it wasn't the same face, just the same sound. "Nice name," he said. The boy grinned and ran off toward the edge of the ruins. Ethan sat down under the tree. The wind hummed low, the same old note it had always carried. From his bag he pulled a notebook, thick, worn, bound with tape. Inside were pages and pages of translations, some official, some personal, all written in his careful, deliberate hand. At the top of the newest page was a date, April 9th, 2024. 20 years since the last recording of Project Serpent. He began to write. "It has been 2 decades since we mistook silence for peace. They told us we were building stability, but what we built was memory, the kind that doesn't fade, only rearranges itself. Ryan survived the inquiry. They reinstated him, gave him medals for something he never did. He stayed in uniform long enough to forget why he joined, then left without ceremony. Last I heard, he was in Montana, fixing fences, speaking to no one unless he had to. Layla left the country. The last letter came from a refugee hospital near Ammon. It wasn't really a letter, just a page torn from an old medical log. She wrote, "We don't heal people. We hold them together long enough for time to decide." No signature, none needed. He paused, looking out at the ruins again, where the clinic had stood, where the interrogation rooms had been, where the river of dust still ran invisible beneath everything. He continued, "As for me, I became what they said I was, a translator. Only now I translate the dead. Their stories come to me half-finished, half-true. I put them into a language that might forgive them. But language doesn't forgive. It only records. He closed the notebook, leaned back against the tree. The sun was sinking, soft, amber, less harsh than it used to be. He could still hear the helicopter sometimes, in memory, not in sound, the way its rotors had carved the air when they took him north, the way Layla's scarf had lifted, the way Ryan's salute had trembled but never fallen. He whispered into the air, words shaped like prayer but meant for no God. We all spoke the same language. We just used it for different wars. The wind answered, a low sigh that carried grains of dust across the empty yard. From somewhere beyond the ruins came the sound of laughter, children playing near the old walls. It was faint, fragile, but it existed, and that, maybe, was all that mattered. Ethan opened his notebook again, flipped to the first page, a page from another life, another war. In the margin, written in his younger handwriting, were the words Layla once said, "Sometimes a wound opens because it wants to see light." He read it aloud. Then, for the first time in years, he smiled. The light had changed. The sun leaned low, painting the sand in golds and violets. The world exhaled, as if relieved that no one was lying to it for the moment. He stood, dusted his palms, looked one last time at what was left of Almiraj, a field of memories, a monument to misunderstanding, and as the horizon swallowed the day, Ethan began to walk, not away, not toward, just forward. His shadow stretched long, and for a moment it looked like someone walking beside him. The wind whispered behind him, a sound almost like a voice translating itself back into silence. Fade to dusk. The screen darkens. Only the last line remains. Simple, still, inevitable. In war, truth isn't lost. It's mistranslated.